Everyone wept at the funeral until a German shepherd rolled in on a wheelchair and did something that tore every heart in the room. The small coastal town had always carried grief like a shadow, but nothing could have prepared them for this sight. 200 people had gathered inside the Riverside Police Department auditorium to honor fallen canine heroes when the rear doors opened with a faint creak that silenced the hall. A German shepherd sat in the chair pushed by a solemn veterinarian. His body was wrapped in bandages, one leg locked in a cast, his black and tan coat dulled by trauma and weight loss. His right ear bore a jagged tear from battles long past, but his eyes sharp, burning brown eyes fixed forward with such intensity that the air itself seemed to shift. He was searching, waiting, and when those eyes found their mark, something rippled through the crowd like a chill wind. That's where the story truly begins. But to understand why this moment shattered everyone present, we need to go back to where it all began. 12 miles outside Three Rivers, California, a cluster of small cabins sat wrapped in the golden hush of an October morning. Leaves spiraled lazily to the ground, painting the land in shades of copper and rust. Inside one cabin, silence clung to the air, that fragile stillness that lingers after dawn, but before the forest fully wakes. Jack McGraw moved through his routine with the slow precision of a man whose body no longer answered as it once did. At 52, he looked older, worn by years and regrets. His hair, once dark, had long since yielded to gray. A neat silver beard framed a face carved by weather and guilt into something far harder than in his youth. A scar slashed down his left forearm, catching the early light as he reached for the coffee pot, a permanent reminder of fire failure and the day everything changed. He stood tall once, 6'2", but now his shoulders bent forward as if he were trying to make himself smaller. His right leg carried a limp, the lasting wound from an explosion that had stolen much more than strength. Mornings were worst before the joints loosened, before memory locked itself back into its boxes. On the kitchen table sat a chipped mug, its faded blue letters still just legible, "World's Best Dad." Clara McGraw had given it to him at 8 years old, her tooth-gapped smile proud of her perfect choice. That was 20 years ago, when Jack could still smile without forcing it. He filled the cup now out of habit, dark and bitter, the way he'd learned during stakeouts that dragged into dawn. His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted it, not from age, though 52, felt ancient, but from something the doctors had named early-onset Alzheimer's. Jack suspected it was his mind finally giving him permission to let go. Some mornings he woke and didn't know where he was for 30, maybe 40 seconds. Those blank spells almost felt like mercy. Then memory returned, heavy as ever. Beside the coffee pot lay his badge, though he had retired from the Riverside Police Department 3 years earlier. He couldn't stop carrying it. The metal was worn smooth, the numbers nearly gone. But the back mattered most. Scratched there with a pocket knife on a drunken night of guilt was a single name, Eli Carter. Jack traced the uneven letters with his thumb, jagged like his judgment that night. From the corner came the soft click of nails on wood. He looked up to see his only true companion stir. Ranger lifted his head from the worn dog bed near the fireplace, his dark eyes finding Jack across the room. At 9 years old, the shepherd was moving into old age, where every step demanded thought first. His once brilliant coat was dulled grayed at the muzzle. His right ear bore a ragged tear twin to Jack's scar, both earned in the same fire and chaos. The dog rose slowly, lifting a paw with visible reluctance. Jack watched, saw the wince Ranger tried to hide. They were a pair, he thought. 2 worn-down soldiers carrying wounds that would never heal, pretending they were still whole. Morning buddy Jack rasped, voice rough from days without speaking. Ranger was the only conversation he had left. The shepherd limped across the floor nails, clicking in uneven rhythm, and settled heavily against Jack's leg. The weight was solid grounding. Jack set down his coffee and scratched behind Ranger's good ear. The dog's tail flicked once, twice a slow beat of contentment. There was a time when Ranger's whole body would have wagged with unrestrained joy. Now even happiness came in small, measured doses, as though he too knew that energy was a scarce resource best saved for moments that mattered. "We're a pair, aren't we?" Jack McGraw muttered under his breath. Two washed-up relics trying to keep going. Ranger gave a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite agreement. His dark eyes lifted toward Jack, with a look so full of concern, it seemed almost human. That dog had always been uncannily perceptive. Back in their days on the force, Ranger seemed to sense danger before Jack's own instincts ever kicked in. Now the shepherd sensed other things. The heavy mornings, when Jack stared too long at the rafters. The nights when nightmares came crashing in, the lonely moments when Jack weighed his service pistol in hand and wondered if he still had the courage to use it one last time. On those nights, Ranger pressed himself against Jack's side, rested his head on his lap, or simply refused to leave him, like he knew that his mission now wasn't chasing down suspects, but keeping one broken man tethered to this world. The night before had been rough. Ranger had slipped into another of those frightening episodes where his mind simply shut down. At 2 a.m, he had stood frozen in the cabin, staring at the front door like he'd never seen it before, whining low with confusion. Jack found him trembling there, lost in his own home. The vet had called it canine cognitive dysfunction, dog dementia. The irony wasn't lost on Jack. Both of them fading, both of them losing pieces of themselves in the fog. Jack's Alzheimer's stole his past. Ranger's condition stole his present. The dog forgot where he was, what he was doing, everything it seemed, except Jack himself. "I know, Ranger," Jack whispered that night as he knelt beside the bewildered shepherd. "I know what it's like. Sometimes I forget too." He led Ranger back to his bed, sat beside him, until recognition returned to those loyal eyes. Then Jack lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering which of them would forget the other first. By morning light, Ranger seemed closer to his old self. His tail gave a slow wag as Jack scratched behind his ear, and when Jack stepped toward the counter to fill his bowl, the dog followed with something close to eagerness. Jack poured the kibble. Watching Ranger nose the bowl sniff once, and then begin eating. He always fed Ranger first. It was an ingrained habit from their working years. The handler put the dog first. The dog eats before you. The dog's needs come before your own. Jack never broke that rule, not even in retirement, not even in exile. Maybe especially now. Ranger was all he had left. The last living being that still depended on him, that trusted him, that stayed. His phone lit up with Clara McGraw's number, 17 missed calls in a week. His daughter, 28, now a veterinarian in San Diego with a life of her own. She called because she worried, probably guessing the truth about how he lived out here in the woods. But Jack couldn't answer. What would he even say? That her father was forgetting how to be human, that some mornings he couldn't recall her name, only that he'd once known a little girl who called him Daddy. By afternoon, the cabin walls felt like they were closing in heavy with silence and memory. The mantel clock read 3. October 15th. Outside, autumn air held that crisp mountain bite pine and dying leaves on the breeze. Jack pushed away from the table. "Want to go to the old place?" he asked. From his patch of sunlight, Ranger lifted his head. His ears twitched forward at those familiar words. Even clouded by age and confusion, he still knew the important ones walk outside Old Place. His tail thumped faintly, a reluctant yes. Jack steadied him to his feet. They hobbled side by side to the door, two limping veterans taking comfort in each other's weakness. Jack grabbed a water bottle from the counter, and as he did, his badge slipped from his pocket and clattered to the floor. He bent down, and a folded photograph fell with it. He opened it, and Eli Carter stared back, 24 years old, bright-eyed, fresh in his academy dress uniform. The kid had been so eager, so sure the world was fair, that good cops made it safer. Jack had believed that once, too, before, he learned that good intentions could kill as surely as bullets. He stared at the picture, and Eli's face asked the same question it always did. Why am I gone, and you're still here? I'm sorry. Jack whispered words worn smooth with repetition. I'm so damn sorry. I'm so sorry. Ranger pressed close against his leg, and Jack McGraw slipped the photograph back into his pocket along with the badge. Some burdens he'd learned never came off your shoulders. Some ghosts followed you no matter how far into the woods you walked. They stepped into the golden October light. The trail leading from Jack's cabin into the forest was one he'd worn down over the years, Ranger's paw prints etched beside his own through 3 years of exile. But this afternoon, Jack pushed farther down toward Pine Ridge Trail, a path he usually avoided. His father had walked there 40 years earlier, and history seemed to whisper in its branches, reminding him that some footsteps echo through generations. The trail wound between giant sequoias, their trunks like cathedral pillars reaching toward a sky broken by streaks of blue and gold. Leaves crackled underfoot. Ranger moved beside him with his uneven limp, stopping now and then to sniff at something only he could sense. The woods were unnervingly quiet, a silence that made Jack's thoughts thunder even louder. He passed the old Raleigh property, shuttered and abandoned for years. Jed Raleigh had once lived there back when they'd been partners, back when Jack still believed brotherhood in uniform meant something sacred. Now those dark windows felt like watchful eyes. A chill slid through Jack's spine, though the air was calm. He didn't know Jed was watching from those shadows, or that the man who'd once saved his life was planning to end it. Ranger's low growl rumbled from his chest hackles bristling along his back. Jack glanced down, saw the tension in his frame, the way his nose tested the air. "What is it, boy?" Jack asked. But even as the words left his mouth, he dismissed them. "Probably deer. Just deer." But Ranger's instincts, dulled though they were by age, and confusion were still sharper than his own. He smelled men in the brush, sensed a wrongness Jack couldn't. Lost in foggy memories and the weight of his pills, Jack ignored it. He'd stopped trusting his instincts years ago, back when they had led Eli Carter to his death. He didn't see the tire tracks cutting across the dirt, fresh wrong. He didn't notice how the birds had gone silent, or how the shadows between the trees felt heavier, unnatural. His mind was elsewhere on Eli's face, in the photo on the half-written suicide note waiting on his kitchen table, on the question of whether Ranger would be okay without him. 30 yards ahead, Clyde Mercer crouched low, whispering into his radio. "Target confirmed." "He's alone." "What about the dog?" Levi Hart's voice crackled back. Clyde studied the shepherd through his binoculars. "Old, limping, slow. He's done for. Won't last much longer anyway." Jed Raleigh's voice came next, flat and cold. "Do it clean. Bury him deep. Let the forest keep him." Clyde pocketed the radio, checked his watch. 3:30. 10 minutes more, and it would be over. One old soldier, one old dog, and a grave no one would ever find. Jack stepped into the clearing, unaware he'd walked into a trap. The open space spread like an amphitheater of stone and earth, the sky pressing down. He'd come here to think, to face ghosts, to breathe air that didn't taste of failure. Ranger leaned against his side, steady, as always offering comfort Jack knew he didn't deserve. "We should head back," Jack muttered more to himself than to Ranger. The sun was dropping, and the return would be hard in the dark, especially with Ranger's bad leg and his own confusion. Some nights he even lost the way home, circling until Ranger tugged at his sleeve like a seeing-eye dog guiding a blind man. He never heard Clyde rushing from behind, never saw the needle before it pierced his neck, cold sedative flooding his bloodstream. Jack spun reflexes of a long-retired cop snapping alive, reaching for a gun he hadn't carried in years. But training couldn't save him now. Ranger lunged, teeth bared, every ounce of loyalty overriding pain and age. Then Levi's boot slammed into his ribs. The shepherd yelped, a sound of pain and betrayal, and tumbled into the rocks. Ranger Jack's vision blurred, the drug pulling him under. "Run, buddy, run!" But Ranger staggered, blood streaking his muzzle, still trying to crawl toward Jack. Jack's last sight was of his partner collapsing beside him the way he'd always feared they would go together. Then a shadow fell across him. Jed Raleigh stepped into view, regret and resolve flickering in his eyes. Jed. Jack's tongue was heavy, the world spinning. Why Jed knelt, voice low and cold. "Because you know too much, Jack. And the dead don't talk." The world went black, and Jack McGraw slipped into a darkness deeper than sleep. Jack McGraw woke to absolute darkness and the crushing weight of Earth. For several seconds, maybe longer, his mind refused to accept what his body already knew. He couldn't move his arms. He couldn't lift his legs. The air was wrong, thick and heavy. When he tried to draw a deep breath, his chest hit resistance, as if the darkness itself had turned solid. Panic came first, pure animal panic. His heart pounded against his ribs, each beat burning up precious oxygen. He tried to scream, but the sound died in his throat, smothered by dirt and terror. His fingers clawed upward and struck packed earth inches from his face. He wasn't in a box. It was worse. He was buried alive. The realization hit like a blow, and with it came a memory, Jed Raleigh's face above him. Those last words before the blackness. "Because you know too much, Jack. And the dead don't talk." But he wasn't dead, not yet. Though that difference was slipping fast. He forced himself to stop thrashing to conserve what little air remained. His training tried to surface the old crisis protocols drilled into him at the academy. But this was beyond any scenario he'd ever faced. Think he commanded himself. How deep? 3 feet, maybe 4. How much air? Not much. Minutes, not hours. Maybe 30 minutes if I stay calm. Less if I panic. Then the fog rolled in the creeping smoke of early-onset Alzheimer's sliding through his consciousness. Where was he? Who was he? The darkness pressed so hard against his eyes that suddenly he couldn't remember his own name. He was someone. He knew that much. Someone who'd done something terrible. Someone who deserved this. Then breaking through the confusion, Ranger. The name came back like a lifeline. He had a dog, Ranger, and Ranger had been with him when— "What had happened, Ranger?" he whispered into the dark. Images flickered Clyde Mercer and Levi Hart in the brush, Ranger, being kicked. Tumbling into rocks. No. Ranger. His partner was hurt, maybe dying alone in the forest because Jack had failed him the way he'd failed Eli Carter. The names connected, stitching his identity back together. Jack McGraw, retired, officer, father to Clara, ex-husband to Evelyn, partner to Ranger, haunted by Eli Carter's death. The guilt crashed over him heavier than the dirt. Of course Jed had buried him. Poetic justice. The man who'd buried himself in guilt for 6 years, now literally buried. Maybe he should stop fighting, stop breathing. Let the earth take him the way it should have taken him in that explosion. But even as the thought formed, his body rebelled. His lungs clawed at the thinning air. His heart hammered its stubborn rhythm. And somewhere in the back of his fractured mind, a voice. Ranger's bark urged him to fight, to hold on. He scraped upward again, but the earth was packed too tight. He couldn't dig himself out. He could only wait in the dark as his oxygen bled away and his mind splintered further. Images flashed behind his closed eyes, Eli's face bright with fire. Clara McGraw, as a little girl, holding up the world's best dad mug. Evelyn on their wedding day smiling like forever was real. Ranger as a puppy choosing him from a row of handlers. Then the hallucinations started. He knew it was oxygen deprivation, but knowing didn't make it less real. Eli Carter appeared whole in the darkness, his face accusing. "You let me die, Jack." Eli's ghost said, his voice echoing inside the cramped space. "Now it's your turn." "I'm sorry," Jack whispered, tears mixing with dirt on his face. "I'm so damn sorry. The intel was wrong. I never would have sent you in if I'd known." "But you did," Eli said. "I died. You lived." "I know," Jack murmured. "God, I know." Eli's face came closer. In the vision, flames reflected in his eyes. "The dog remembers what you forgot," Eli said, his voice soft, now almost kind. "He remembers. You're worth saving." Then Eli was gone, and Jack was alone again in the crushing dark. His breaths came faster, shorter. The air was nearly gone. His thoughts scattered like frightened birds. He forgot where he was again. Forgot why he couldn't move. Forgot everything except a primal scream building in his chest that had no air to carry it. Ranger. He managed one last time, barely a whisper. "If you can hear me, it's okay. Save yourself." The darkness pulled him down, and Jack McGraw surrendered to it, believing he'd never wake again. 15 minutes earlier, Ranger had regained consciousness. His head throbbed from where it had struck the rocks, and pain seared his left front paw when he tried to put weight on it. Blood clung to the fur on Ranger's muzzle copper, filling his mouth. For a few seconds he lay still, dazed, his mind clouded by canine dementia, the forest twisting into something alien. Where was he? What had happened? Then the scent hit him. Jack. His person. Jack's smell was everywhere, familiar, grounding, but wrong somehow, tainted with fear, and something deeper he couldn't name. The scent was coming from beneath the earth. Training buried under years of retirement began to rise to the surface, commands etched into muscle and bone. Find, track, locate. Even when his mind faltered, his body remembered. Ranger staggered to his feet, ribs aching where Levi Hart's boot had landed his paw, screaming with pain when he tried to put weight on it. But pain was nothing new. He had been taught to push through it to serve the mission. And his mission always was Jack McGraw. He limped forward, blood from his paw dotting the fallen leaves. His gait was lopsided, a three-legged hobble that would have looked clumsy if not for the desperate urgency driving him. He circled nose sweeping wide, just as he'd been taught at the Canine Academy years ago. The trail was clear at first, Jack's scent sharp. Then it ended abruptly at a mound of freshly turned earth clumsily hidden beneath branches and leaves. Ranger lowered his nose, inhaled deep. Yes, Jack was here. beneath the soil. He'd been on enough calls with Jack to know the smell of death to understand burial. But comprehension wasn't the same as acceptance. All Ranger knew was that his person was underground, and that meant only one thing he had to dig. But then the fog swept in dementia, clawing at his thoughts. He froze, sat heavily on his haunches, tail tucked, ears flat. The world bent sideways. The mound of dirt looked strange, unfamiliar. He blinked, confused, lost. A butterfly fluttered past, catching his gaze. His focus slipped. For a moment, he followed it, drifting away from the only thing that mattered. Then the butterfly passed over a scrap of Jack's clothing, torn and left behind in the struggle. Ranger's nose caught the scent again, strong, immediate, undeniable. The fog shattered. Memory training, love, loyalty, all of it surged back. Jack was here. Jack needed him. He turned back to the mound and began to dig. Each strike of his paw sent pain lancing through his body. Blood smeared across the soil, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The old command echoed, "The handler's life comes first." There were no other handlers now. No backup, no rescue. Only him and Jack, and the weight of earth between them. He clawed with his front paws until agony forced him to switch, tearing at the soil with his back legs, dirt flying behind him. Inch by inch, the hole deepened. His pad split open, leaving bloody streaks in the dirt. His chest heaved, tongue lolling, but the moment his body begged for rest, Jack's scent pulled him back like a command. 1 foot down, 18 inches, 2 feet. The smell of Jack was overwhelming, now tangled with fear sweat and the edge of death. Ranger barked once, raw, broken, desperate. "Hold on! I'm coming!" Inside the grave, Jack thought he heard something. A faint scratching, a sound almost imagined another cruel hallucination from his starved brain, but it sounded like digging. 28 inches. Ranger's paw ripped through fabric, Jack's shirt. The shepherd's heart leapt. He dug faster, wider, shoving dirt aside, muzzle caked in blood and soil. 30 inches down, his eyes caught skin Jack's hand. The fingers lay motionless. Ranger let out a broken whine and clamped his teeth onto Jack McGraw's sleeve. He pulled with everything he had left, his old body trembling, his injured paw scraping against the earth despite the fire of pain shooting through it. His jaws locked like steel, refusing to let go. Down in the grave, Jack felt pressure on his arm, felt himself being dragged upward inch, by something stronger than reason. His oxygen-starved brain couldn't make sense of it, but his body responded, pushing weakly upward, while something above clawed and pulled with desperate strength. For 15 endless minutes, man and dog fought together against the weight of death itself, Jack straining from below, Ranger pulling from above. 15 minutes of pure agony stretched into an eternity. Then Jack's head broke the surface. He sucked in air, choking, coughing, dirt and blood lungs screaming with relief. His vision was a blur, his mind fractured, but he could see him, Ranger, his partner bloodied, filthy, still tugging at his sleeve, refusing to quit. "Ranger!" Jack gasped. The name came out as a prayer, a plea, a vow of love, all in one. With Ranger pulling and Jack's fading push, they dragged him up further shoulders, then chest until Jack collapsed half free, his legs still trapped, but alive, breathing. Ranger finally released the sleeve and collapsed beside him, his body trembling with exhaustion and pain. They lay together in the dirt, broken, half-conscious, but alive. Jack's trembling hand found the dog's head fingers tangled in blood-matted fur. "Good boy," he whispered, voice barely a breath. "You did it. Good boy." Ranger's tail thumped once against the ground, weak but certain. A promise older than language. "I am here. I won't leave you, not ever." Far off in the darkening forest, a search party was assembling. Clara McGraw had finally convinced the Three Rivers police to check on her father. Officers were moving out. A canine unit was gearing up. Help was coming, though. Jack and Ranger didn't know it yet. All they knew was this moment two worn souls lying in the dirt, one refusing to let the other go, both clinging to each other in the darkest place imaginable. For now, that was enough. Amos Holloway found them just after 8. His flashlight cut through the night and froze on a sight he would never forget, an old man half buried in earth, motionless, and beside him, a German shepherd so caked in blood and dirt that Amos thought he'd been shot. The dog didn't move when the beam hit him, didn't even lift his head. He just kept one paw resting on Jack's chest as if to anchor him to the world. Jesus Christ. Amos breathed into his radio. I found him. I found Jack McGraw. Send medical evac now. He's been buried alive. Dispatch crackled back, confirming. More units mobilized. Amos moved closer, cautious, unsure if the dog might lash out. But Ranger only stared with exhausted eyes, no strength left for aggression, no energy for anything but breathing. Amos checked Jack first, fingers pressed to his neck. A pulse, weak, unsteady, but there. Sir, can you hear me? No response. Jack's lips were blue skin, cold and damp. Classic signs of hypothermia and oxygen deprivation. Amos keyed his radio again. Patients alive. Repeat, alive but critical. Hypothermic, possible hypoxia. Where's that chopper? Then his eyes fell on Ranger. The dog's injuries were obvious, paw torn to ribbons, fur matted with blood-labored breaths, hinting at broken ribs. But it was his eyes that shook Amos, most pain confusion, and something achingly human. Easy boy, Amos murmured, hand reaching out, slow. Ranger didn't flinch. He didn't even move when Amos' hand rested on his head. You did good, Amos said softly. You did real good. That's when he noticed the ground, the torn-up dirt, the bloody paw prints everywhere, the drag marks. The story told itself this dog had dug his handler out of his grave with nothing but shredded paws and sheer will. How long? Amos whispered, stunned. 4 hours. 5 more officers crashed through the brush with med gear. Paramedics dropped to Jack's side, checking vitals, starting an IV, prepping him for evac. The thump of helicopter blades grew louder inbound from Kauai Delta Medical Center in Visalia. The dog Amos shouted, "Somebody get a vet. This dog needs help too." One of the medics glanced at Ranger, eyes wide. "We'll call from the chopper. Get a vet team rolling, but the man comes first." Amos Holloway's voice was sharp, almost harsher than he meant. His gaze never left the dog. "This dog saved his life. He gets care too." They lifted Jack McGraw onto a stretcher, limp an oxygen mask pressed over his face. Ranger's head rose, weakly eyes following. For a heartbeat, it looked like he might try to stand to follow his partner, but his body betrayed him. He collapsed back onto the dirt, a thin whine leaking from his throat. "It's okay, boy," Amos murmured, crouching low beside him while the others worked. "He's gonna make it. You did it. You saved him. He's gonna make it. He's gonna make..." The helicopter dropped into a clearing 30 yards out its rotors, whipping leaves into a frenzy. They carried Jack toward it, his body strapped down, and Ranger's eyes tracked every step until the bird lifted off, carrying Jack away into the night sky. Only then did the veterinary ambulance arrive, rattling down the rough back roads from Fresno. Doña Esther Whitlock, head of the emergency veterinary clinic, climbed out with her assistant and a gurney built for large animals. She knelt beside Ranger, and for a moment the professional mask slipped. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, her hands already moving, clinical and fast. Blood loss, shredded paws, fractured ribs, head trauma. Her fingers catalogued each wound. She looked up at Amos. What happened here? Best we can figure somebody buried McGraw alive. The dog found him, dug him out. Took hours. Doña Esther's eyes glistened, though her voice stayed steady. Hours of digging with paws like this. She shook her head in awe. The pain should have stopped him. It didn't. They eased Ranger onto the gurney, careful as glass. He didn't fight, didn't resist. He was too far gone. An IV slid into his leg, painkillers and fluids flowing. We're taking him to VCA Advanced in Fresno, she told Amos. It's the best Amos asked. Her silence was telling. She studied the torn pads, the rasp of his breaths. I don't know, she admitted. By all rights, he should have stopped hours ago. But he didn't. She stroked Ranger's head voice low. That wasn't training. That was love. The ambulance pulled away, leaving Amos with his flashlight, his radio, and a story so wild he wasn't sure anyone would believe it. He walked back to the grave site, the light sweeping across torn earth. The trail told the whole truth, blood-stained paw prints circling, then frantic digging dirt flung aside the blood heavier as the paws broke down, but still the digging never stopped. He'd worked alongside canine units before, had seen courage, seen miracles, but nothing like this. Nothing that spoke this clearly of devotion. His phone buzzed. Clara McGraw calling from the road. She had been driving up from San Diego when dispatch reached her. Is he alive? Her voice cracked with fear. Yes, ma'am. Critical but alive. They've got him en route to Kaweah Delta. What happened? Dispatch said something about him being buried. Amos hesitated, words thick. Someone tried to kill him. Buried him alive out here. But his dog, Ranger dug him out. The line went silent so long he thought the call had dropped. Then Clara's voice came back thick with tears. Ranger found him. Yes, ma'am. Saved his life. But the dog's hurt bad, too. They're taking him to Fresno now. Oh, God! Ranger! Her voice broke completely. How bad? Amos stared at the bloody soil, the shredded prints. He answered quietly. Real bad. 200 miles away in Riverside, Evelyn McGraw sat frozen in her kitchen. Clara had called 20 minutes earlier, and she still hadn't moved, hadn't processed. Jack buried alive. Ranger saving him, both clinging to life. It was too much, too unreal, too perfectly tragic. Her eyes shifted to the old photograph pinned to her fridge by a dog bone magnet. Jack on their wedding day, young, strong, smiling shadow at his side, the canine who had once saved Hank McGraw's life in 1985. That legacy of loyalty, of devotion between man and dog had never left their family. Ranger was Shadow's descendant. She remembered the day Jack brought the pup home. It's like Shadow came back, he'd said, awe in his voice, like a second chance at the story. And now Ranger had done what Shadow once had saved the McGraw name again. History was looping back on itself, loyalty echoing through 4 long decades. Evelyn McGraw pushed herself up from the chair so suddenly it scraped across the tile. Her hand closed around the car keys. She had walked away from Jack McGraw 4 years earlier, left, because the weight of his guilt was crushing them both. She had built a different life, safe and steady, far from his ghosts. But the call he'd been buried alive in some God-forsaken forest while she sat in her quiet kitchen split something raw inside her. I'm coming, she whispered to the photograph on her fridge, to the memories she swore she'd buried. I'm coming, Jack. Within minutes, she was on the highway headlights carving through the night. Northbound toward Visalia, toward a man she had promised forever to, and then abandoned when forever grew too heavy. The road stretched long and dark, and Evelyn pressed the gas harder, chasing a reunion she wasn't sure either of them deserved, but knew they both needed. High above in the helicopter, Jack hovered between life and death. His body had shut down everything non-essential clinging to the barest spark. Meanwhile, in the veterinary ambulance, Ranger lay sedated, his heart rate jagged, his breathing shallow. Man and dog traveled separate paths to separate hospitals, but their bond, tested in dirt and darkness, remained unbroken, stronger than fear, stronger than death. When Jack's eyes finally opened, he was blinded by fluorescent lights and the antiseptic sting of hospital air. For a long moment, he was nothing but confusion. His mind wiped clean by trauma and the creeping fog of his disease. Ceiling tiles swam above him, stained and cracked like maps to places he couldn't name. Then came a voice, a woman's voice, tremulous but insistent. "Dad, Dad, can you hear me?" He turned his head. The effort strange, disconnected. A young woman sat beside him, dark hair framing a face swollen with tears. She was beautiful, familiar in a way he couldn't place, like a dream just out of reach. "Who are you?" The words rasped out of him like broken glass. Her face shattered. Tears spilled faster. "It's me, Clara. Your daughter. I'm Clara. Daughter." The word rattled inside him, heavy with meaning he couldn't grasp. He searched the fog for the thread, the connection, but came up empty. "I don't have a daughter," he said, and even as the lie left his lips, some deep part of him recoiled. He saw her crumble under the words, her hand covering her mouth as sobs racked her frame. "Oh, Dad. Oh, God." The door burst open. A doctor swept in, checking Jack's vitals with brisk efficiency. "Mr. McGraw, I'm Doc Whitmore," he said, his voice steady. "You're at Kauai Delta Medical Center. You were buried alive. Do you remember what happened buried alive?" The phrase should have jolted something loose, should have brought panic rage, anything. But Jack's mind was fog. He shook his head slowly. "I don't remember." "That's not uncommon after oxygen deprivation," Doc Whitmore explained, shining a penlight into his eyes. "You were without air for too long. Combined with your early onset Alzheimer's, the trauma has accelerated the memory loss." "Alzheimer's," Jack repeated, rolling the word on his tongue. It sounded familiar, heavy with truth, but hollow in his understanding. "You were diagnosed 2 years ago," the doctor continued gently. "Early onset. But this episode has pushed it further. You've lost significant memory function." Clara broke, then sobbing openly. Jack wanted to reach for her to ease her pain, but he didn't know why it hurt him so much to see her cry. He looked closer, saw his own eyes staring back, his jawline echoed in hers. She was his. That realization hit like a knife of grief for something he couldn't even name. "I'm sorry," he whispered hoarsely. "I'm sorry. I don't remember you." Clara clutched his hand, knuckles white. "It's okay. You're alive. That's what matters, Dad." But even through the haze, Jack knew it wasn't okay. Forgetting your own child wasn't survival, it was its own kind of death. "Tell me," he begged. "Tell me who you are. Please." Clara wiped her face, gathering herself. "I'm Clara. I'm 28. I'm a veterinarian in San Diego. I love animals because you taught me to. You taught me that loyalty matters, that protecting the vulnerable matters. You taught me everything good about myself." Something shifted in Jack McGraw's chest. Not quite memory, but the shadow of one. A little girl with pigtails flashed in his mind, holding up a mug with a gap-toothed grin. "Daddy, I got you something." "A mug," Jack blurted suddenly. You gave me a mug. Clara McGraw's face lit up with desperate hope. Yes, the world's best dad mug. I was 8. You still have it. Dad? You still use it every morning? World's best dad, Jack repeated. The words felt true even if the memory stayed just out of reach. But then another thought pierced the fog, urgent, unshakable. Ranger. Where's Ranger? Clara's expression broke hope, collapsing into grief. He's at the veterinary hospital in Fresno. He's in bad shape, Dad. The name struck something primal inside Jack. A dog, his dog. No more than that. His partner. His anchor. The only constant in a life that kept slipping through his fingers. He saved me, Jack said firmly. Even without details, he knew it like gospel. He dug me out. Yes, Clara whispered, tears streaming freely. He found you and dug you out. For 4 hours, Dad. He was injured, but he dug for 4 hours. Is he dying? The words came flat, stripped of emotion. But inside Jack's chest bloomed a terror so deep it had no language. Clara hesitated. That silence was answer enough. He lost a lot of blood. His paws are shredded ribs broken. The vet said he should have stopped. The pain alone should have stopped him. But he didn't. I need to see him. Jack tried to push himself up, but his body refused, too weak, too wrecked. Doc Whitmore pressed him back gently. Mr. McGraw, you're in no condition to move. You've been through extreme trauma. We need to monitor you for at least 72 hours. Ranger. It was all Jack could manage. One word, the most important word in a vocabulary, slipping away. Clara leaned close. Dad, Ranger is the one thing you remember. The doctor said that with Alzheimer's and trauma, sometimes the strongest emotional bond survives when everything else fades. Jack studied her face, this stranger, who claimed to be his daughter, and felt the weight of everything he'd lost. But when he thought of Ranger, there was no fog. He saw him clearly, the torn ear, the loyal eyes, the gray muzzle. Felt the weight of him leaning against his leg. Remembered, if nothing else, being loved unconditionally. He stayed when everyone else left. Jack murmured the words, rising from somewhere deeper than memory. Clara's grip on his hand tightened. I never left, Dad. I called you 17 times this week. You just wouldn't answer. Jack wanted to explain, wanted to apologize. But the fog thickened again, and exhaustion dragged him down. I don't remember he admitted the truest, cruelest words he had. The door opened. Another woman stepped in, older than Clara, her movements hesitant. Her face struck him with an ache of recognition, though the name wouldn't come. She stopped when she saw him awake, her hand flying to her mouth. Well, she breathed. Jack stared, desperate for connection, for the name that belonged to her. She was important, he felt it in his bones. The way she looked at him carried history, intimacy, love, and loss. This is Mom, Clara said softly. Evelyn, your ex-wife. Ex-wife, Jack repeated. Even through the fog, the word cut. Something had been whole, and then broken. I don't remember you either, he said. Evelyn stepped closer, eyes brimming. That's okay. It's okay, Jack. But it wasn't, and they all knew it. Jack saw it in her trembling face, in the way she turned to hide her tears. He had been married to this woman, built a life with her. And now she was a stranger, wearing the face of someone who once meant everything. I'm sorry, he whispered. The words felt impossibly small against the weight of what had been lost. Evelyn turned back, trying to steady herself, her mask fragile. Don't be sorry. Just get better. That's all that matters. Doc Whitmore cleared his throat, his expression grave. I need to be honest with all of you. Doc Whitmore's voice carried the weight of finality. The oxygen deprivation has caused severe damage. Combined with the Alzheimer's, Jack McGraw's cognition is badly compromised. Some memories may return, but many are gone for good. But he remembers Ranger Clara McGraw insisted clinging to the only piece of hope left. Emotional memory is different from episodic memory, Whitmore explained. The bond with his dog is primal, deeply etched. It survives even when everything else fades. Right now, that bond is the last thread tying him to his identity. Jack closed his eyes, exhausted. Trying to exist without memories was like trying to breathe without air. Yet even in the dark behind his eyelids, he could still see Ranger, still feel those paws digging, dragging him back from death. How long Evelyn McGraw's voice was barely a whisper. How long before the Alzheimer's takes everything? Whitmore's silence stretched long enough to say it all. Finally, he answered, It's impossible to predict. But the trauma has accelerated things. Months, maybe less. The room went still heavy with the verdict. Jack opened his eyes again, looking at Clara and Evelyn, women who loved him, whom he had forgotten. He wanted to feel grief, wanted to feel anything, but all he could summon was one word. Ranger. I need to see Ranger. Clara looked to Whitmore, who shook his head. Not possible. Jack is too fragile to travel, and the dog is in critical care himself. Then bring Ranger here. Jack's voice cracked, but grew stronger, fueled by something deeper than memory. He saved my life. He deserves to see me breathing. He deserves to know it mattered. Evelyn placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. You're a vet. Is there any way? Clara bit her lip, weighing options. If he stabilizes enough for transport, and if both hospitals agree it might be possible. Complicated, but possible. Do it, Jack said firmly, more certain than he'd been of anything since waking. Please, if I forget everything else, let me thank him one last time. Clara nodded, already pulling out her phone. I'll call Doña Esther Whitlock at VCA. I'll make it happen, Dad. I promise. Jack let his eyes close again, surrendering to exhaustion. But before sleep claimed him, he whispered the only words that felt solid. Good boy, Ranger. 90 miles away, in a Fresno ICU. Ranger lay sedated, his vitals unstable. His prognosis was bleak. But that evening, when Doña Esther checked his monitors, something unexpected happened. His erratic heart rate steadied, his ragged breathing smoothed, as if he were holding on for something. Waiting. You stubborn old soldier, she murmured, stroking his battered head. What are you holding out for? If Ranger could have answered, the truth would have been simple. Jack. He was waiting for Jack. Meanwhile, the investigation gained momentum. Once Jack was strong enough to give a statement, fragments of memory surfaced. A face. Jed Raleigh's face. The words, "The dead don't talk." But the reasons, the secrets Jed had buried, those remained locked away in the fog. At the Three Rivers police station, Wyatt Raleigh sat frozen in front of the evidence board, dread churning in his gut. At 26, he'd spent his whole career chasing the standard set by his father. Jed Raleigh had been a decorated detective before retirement, a man Wyatt had idolized. But the evidence didn't lie. Tire tracks matched a Ford F-150 registered to Clyde Mercer, one of Jed's known associates. Soil samples from Clyde's boots matched the burial site. And worse, Jack McGraw's badge had been found in Jed Raleigh's safe house, alongside enough drug trafficking records to bury him for life. Frank Cotter Wyatt's partner approached cautiously. Wyatt, we need to talk about this. I know, Wyatt's voice was hollow. He'd called his father 17 times since the evidence began pointing straight at him. 17 calls, no answer. Just like Clara had called her father 17 times before he vanished. The warrant's signed. "We move tonight," Frank said. Wyatt's jaw clenched. "I'll do it. That's against protocol. Conflict of interest." "He's my father." Wyatt's hands trembled. "And it has to be me. I need to be the one," Wyatt Raleigh said. Frank Cotter studied him for a long, heavy moment before finally nodding. 24 hours. After that, it goes official." Wyatt drove toward his father's safe house, his service weapon riding heavier than ever on his hip. The place sat back off a dirt road, secluded, the perfect hideout when the world was closing in. He'd been there countless times for Sunday dinners, back when he believed his father's cover story about private security work. The door wasn't even locked. Wyatt entered with his weapon-drawn training, pushing past the voice screaming in his head, "This is my dad." The man who'd taught him how to ride a bike, how to throw a curveball, how to believe in justice. He found Jed Raleigh in the living room, slumped among empty whiskey bottles. On the coffee table sat Jack McGraw's badge gleaming like an accusation. Jed looked up, eyes bloodshot, his voice slurred. "Wyatt, I figured you'd come." Wyatt kept his aim steady. "Dad, what did you do?" "What I had to." Jed reached for the badge, running his thumb across the back where Eli Carter's name was etched. "What I've been running from for 6 years." Wyatt's chest tightened. He knew the story Officer Eli Carter dead in an explosion. The botched op that ended Jack McGraw's career. "What about him?" Jed laughed, hollow and humorless. "It was me. The intel was wrong. I sent Eli into that building. I killed him, not Jack. But Jack took the blame. He retired, carried the guilt, shielded me." The words hit Wyatt like fists. His father, the man he'd idolized, had destroyed another man's life to hide his own failure. "And then you tried to kill him," Wyatt said, voice breaking. "The last man alive who knew the truth." Jed staggered to his feet. "I thought if Jack was gone, I could finally be free. But you can't bury guilt, son. You just bury yourself trying." Wyatt's gun hand trembled. "You taught me honor. You taught me to protect people. To know right from wrong." "I know," Jed whispered. "And now I have to arrest you, my own father. I know." Jed lifted his hands, making no move to fight. "I'm sorry for lying, for failing you, for becoming everything I warned you against." Wyatt lowered his gun, pulling out cuffs with hands shaking so hard he almost dropped them. "Jed Raleigh, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Jack McGraw, for trafficking, and for conspiracy." His voice cracked as he recited the Miranda rights words he'd spoken countless times, never to his own blood. As Wyatt locked the cuffs, Jed asked quietly, "The dog saved him, didn't he?" "That old shepherd," Ranger Wyatt corrected. Jed nodded. "Ranger. Jack always said that dog was truer than any partner he ever had. Guess he was right." Wyatt walked his father out to the patrol car, every step splintering his heart. Curtains twitched. Neighbors watched. By morning, everyone would know the celebrated detective's son had hauled his own father to jail. At the car, Jed said one last thing. "That dog, he's got more honor than me. More than most men I've known." Wyatt didn't answer. He just closed the door and drove toward the station, toward the wreckage of everything he thought he knew about family. Hours later, in the Riverside PD interrogation room, Jed Raleigh broke. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He confessed it all, the bad intel that killed Eli Carter, Jack McGraw's self-sacrifice, the years of corruption that followed the decision to silence the only witness left. Silas Thorne sat across from him, his face hard as granite. He'd worked beside Jed for 15 years. Why now? Why, 6 years later, Jed's hand trembled on the table. Because 6 years ago, Jack saved me by destroying himself, and I couldn't live with that debt. I couldn't look at him without seeing the cost. So I tried to erase him, to bury him, to forget. But the dog wouldn't let you. Jed gave a broken laugh. No, Ranger wouldn't let me. Silas shoved back his chair, rising to his feet. You wrecked a good man's life. Jack McGraw carried your guilt. He lost his career, his family, his sanity, and you let him. I know, Jed whispered, and when the guilt became too heavy, you tried to kill him. Silas Thorne leaned across the interrogation table, his voice sharp as steel. I hope it was worth it, Jed, because you'll spend the rest of your life in a cage. And Jack McGraw, he finally gets to be free. His name cleared his record set, straight the truth told. For the first time, something like relief flickered across Jed Raleigh's face. Good. Tell it. Tell everyone it was me. Jack was innocent. He was always innocent. Silas left the room and called a press conference. By sundown, the story was everywhere. Detective Jed Raleigh arrested for attempted murder. The truth about Eli Carter's death revealed. Retired Officer Jack McGraw exonerated after 6 years of undeserved guilt. At Kaweah Delta Medical Center, Clara McGraw's phone buzzed non-stop news alerts texts from her dad's old colleagues, even reporters begging for quotes. She silenced it all and slipped into her father's hospital room. Jack sat by the window, staring out with a vacant expression. Dad, Clara said softly, her voice trembling. There's news about Eli Carter, about what really happened. Jack turned, confusion clouding his eyes. Connor, the officer who died 6 years ago, the name on your badge. Dad, it wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. Jed Raleigh confessed. He gave the wrong intel. He's the one who should have carried that guilt, not you. Jack stared at her, trying to process, trying to connect dots that no longer lined up in his mind. I don't understand, he whispered. You've been punishing yourself for 6 years for something you didn't do. You took the fall to protect him. You destroyed yourself for his mistake. Clara's tears spilled equal parts relief and rage. You were innocent, Dad. You were always innocent. Innocent, Jack repeated, tasting the word. Then his eyes sharpened suddenly, urgently. Where's Ranger? Clara's heart ached. Even with his name cleared, even freed from the weight of 6 years of guilt, her father's mind clung only to the dog. Doña Esther Whitlock says he's stable enough for transport. We can bring him here tomorrow. Tomorrow, Jack nodded, some of the tension melting from his face. I need to see him. Need to tell him. Tell him what, Dad? Jack looked at her, and for a flicker of a moment his gaze cleared. Recognition. Connection. To tell him he saved more than my life. He saved something. I don't remember what, but it mattered. Clara gripped his hand. You saved each other. That's what love does. It saves us even when we can't save ourselves. Jack turned back to the window, but he kept hold of her hand. Ranger, he murmured. Good boy, Ranger. In Fresno, Doña Esther Whitlock prepared Ranger for transport. Against every odd, the shepherd had defied death, blood loss, infection, trauma that should have ended him. Yet his vitals had steadied his body, fighting with a determination that defied medicine. You're holding out for him, aren't you? She whispered, checking his bandages. You know he's alive. You're waiting to see him. Ranger's tail twitched against the table, the first deliberate movement in days. His eyes clouded by pain, and sedatives seemed to focus on something far beyond the room. Tomorrow, Doña Esther promised. Tomorrow you'll see him. That night, both man and dog slept more peacefully than they had in weeks. 90 miles apart, but bound by something deeper than distance, deeper than medicine. They were already together, tied by the bond that had carried Ranger through 4 hours of agony and pulled Jack out of suffocating darkness. Tomorrow, they would be reunited. Tomorrow, Ranger would know his sacrifice had mattered. Tomorrow, Jack would finally say thank you. But no one, not Clara, not Evelyn, not the officers making preparations, knew what Ranger would do when that moment came. No one could guess the final act of devotion that would break every heart in the room. The question hanging in headlines across the nation: what did the canine do afterward? That broke everyone's heart waited for its answer in the hours ahead. October 25th dawned with crisp autumn clarity, the kind of day that made the world feel sharp-edged and too real. 10 days since the rescue, 10 days of Jack clawing his way back in body while his mind drifted in fog. 10 days of Ranger fighting an infection that should have ended him. But both had survived. And today, at the annual K9 memorial ceremony hosted by the Riverside Police Department, Clara had arranged something special, a recognition for Ranger and for her father. More importantly, Clara McGraw had convinced Doña Esther Whitlock to allow Ranger to attend against every medical warning. "He's not strong enough for this," Doña Esther had cautioned. "The stress alone could kill him." "He needs to see my father," Clara insisted. "And my father needs to see him. They need each other more than they need safety." Now, Clara stood outside the Riverside Police Department auditorium as the veterinary transport van pulled up. An assistant wheeled out a modified chair, and in it sat Ranger, bandaged one leg in a cast ribs, wrapped his body frail from weight loss. But his eyes were alive, scanning the lot with a sharpness that cut through his broken body. "He knows," Doña Esther whispered. "Somehow he knows Jack is here." Inside, 200 people filled the auditorium, officers in dress blues, retired K9 handlers, civilians, reporters. At the front, Jack McGraw sat between Evelyn McGraw and a nurse assigned to monitor him. He wore his old uniform, the one Clara had dug out of his cabin closet. It sagged loose on his thinner frame. But the badge gleamed on his chest, Eli Carter's name still carved on the back. Jack's mind was unmoored, lost in the noise and movement. 3 times on the ride over he had asked, "Why am I here?" 3 times, Clara had answered, "You're being honored, Dad. You and Ranger." And each time the word Ranger had been the anchor pulling him back. "Where's Ranger?" he'd asked. "He's coming, I promise." Now, as the ceremony began, Silas Thorne stepped up to the podium. He spoke of the history of Riverside's K9 units, of the dogs who had laid down their lives, of the bond between handler and partner that went deeper than training. Jack's gaze drifted to the large framed photo on stage. Eli Carter, in his academy dress uniform, frozen forever at 24, smiling with a future that never came. 6 years ago, Silas said, we lost Officer Eli Carter in an explosion during a raid. A tragedy that took a bright young officer and scarred everyone who knew him. The word explosion stirred something in Jack's fogged mind. Fire screams, guilt pressing down like soil. But the details wouldn't surface, only the crushing weight of it. His handler, Officer Jack McGraw, was critically injured in that same incident. For 6 years, Jack carried the burden alone. But new evidence has come to light. The room went still. This was news to many. The investigation that led to Eli Carter's death was compromised by faulty intelligence from former detective Jed Raleigh. Raleigh has confessed to that failure and to the attempted murder of Jack McGraw when he tried to silence the last man who knew the truth. Jack was innocent. He always was. He sacrificed himself to shield a partner who did not deserve it. That sacrifice cost him everything. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Jack heard his name words like innocent and sacrifice, but couldn't connect them to himself. Beside him, Evelyn wept openly. The nurse's eyes stayed locked on his vitals. Clara leaned close, whispering, "Dad, do you hear that Connor's death wasn't your fault? It wasn't on you." Jack's eyes flicked from her to Eli's photograph. "I couldn't save him," he murmured the only truth he knew. "It wasn't your job to save him from someone else's mistake," Clara whispered. But her father's mind clung only to loss. Silas kept speaking, shifting now to a different story. 10 days ago, Jack McGraw was buried alive in the forest by Jed Raleigh's associates. He was left to die. But his canine partner refused that fate. At the back, the doors creaked open. Doña Esther pushed Ranger's chair inside, quiet as possible. The moment Ranger entered, his head snapped up, his ears pricked, body quivering with sudden purpose. Silas's voice carried through the hush. For 4 hours, this 9-year-old shepherd dug with shredded paws, broken ribs, and every reason to give up. But he didn't. He found his handler and dragged him back to life. Eyes across the room brimmed with tears. Ranger lifted his nose, sifting through the storm of scents, perfume, coffee, polished leather, and found the only one that mattered. Jack. His person. His world. Beneath Doña Esther's hand, Ranger tensed like a coiled spring. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "Not yet." But Ranger was done waiting. With strength that seemed impossible, he pushed himself up from the wheelchair, balancing on 3 legs, his injured paw held carefully off the ground. Doña Esther Whitlock reached for him, but he was already moving, hobbling down the aisle toward the front. Silas Thorne stopped mid-sentence, every head turned. 200 people sat frozen as the battered, bandaged shepherd limped forward. Every step was agony, every breath ragged, yet his eyes stayed locked on the only thing that mattered. Jack McGraw heard the stir turned and saw Ranger dragging himself toward him. For a moment, his broken mind couldn't quite place the figure until the truth hit him like thunder. Ranger Jack's voice cracked on the name. He tried to stand, but his body betrayed him, his legs buckling beneath his weight. The nurse caught his arm, but Jack pulled free, reaching out, desperate. "Ranger, I'm here, boy!" The dog quickened his limp. Sheer will driving him forward 50 feet, 40-30. Officers stepped aside, forming a path, many of them openly wiping their faces. Silas stepped back from the podium, recognizing this moment was greater than any speech. 20 feet. 10. Ranger's chest heaved, his bad paw brushing the ground and sending shudders through him. But he didn't quit. He couldn't. Jack was alive, and Ranger would finish what he'd started. They met in the aisle. Jack managed to stand, clinging to the seat in front of him, and Ranger collapsed into his legs. Jack dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around the dog, pulling him close. Ranger melted into him, every muscle loosening for the first time in 10 days. Jack sobbed, his whole frame shaking. You found me, boy, you found me." Ranger whimpered a sound of release and love, his tail flicking weakly, his tongue brushing Jack's face. In that instant, nothing else existed, man and dog partners bound by fire and earth saving each other in ways words could never capture. The auditorium was silent, except for the muffled sound of 200 people failing to hold back tears. Clara McGraw pressed her hands to her mouth, crying freely. Evelyn McGraw broke completely, tears streaking down her face. Even hardened cops with decades of service stood with wet eyes. But then Ranger did something no one expected. After soaking in Jack's embrace, the shepherd pulled away. Jack clutched at him, confused. "Ranger, where are you going?" The dog's eyes met his, and in them was a message as clear as speech. "Trust me, there's one last thing I need to do." Ranger turned from Jack and began limping toward the stage. Gasps rippled through the room. Step by painful step, he climbed the stairs, dragging his body higher while the crowd held its breath. Doña Esther moved to stop him, but Clara caught her arm. "Let him go," Clara whispered. "He knows." At the top, Ranger hobbled across to the easel holding Eli Carter's photograph. The shepherd sat before it, swaying from exhaustion. Then slowly, deliberately, he lifted his good paw and placed it against the frame. A canine salute. Respect for a fallen officer. But it was more than instinct, it was farewell. The room froze. Ranger held the salute for a long, aching moment, then turned his head back toward Jack, still on his knees in the aisle. The look said it all. "I'm saying goodbye for you. I'm honoring him for you. I'm freeing you from the guilt you carried." Jack stared at him, and for a heartbeat his face shifted as though he understood, if not with memory, then with soul. He couldn't recall every detail of Eli's death, but he grasped what Ranger was doing. This final act of devotion was the release Jack had never been able to give himself. "Thank you, Jack," whispered, voice breaking. "Not just to Ranger, but to something larger, mercy, forgiveness, the end of years of darkness." Ranger lowered his paw and turned back toward Jack. He managed a step, then another. But the climb, the salute, the weight of it all, it had cost him everything he had left. His legs gave out and Ranger collapsed on the stage. Doña Esther Whitlock was there in seconds, her hands flying over him, her professional calm cracking beneath the fear in her eyes. "He's crashing, blood pressures plummeting, heart rate all over the place. Get him to emergency care now!" someone shouted. But Jack McGraw was already dragging himself onto the stage with a burst of strength no one thought he had left. He dropped beside Ranger, lifting the shepherd's head into his lap, holding him close. "No," Jack pleaded, his voice breaking. "You don't get to leave me. Not now, not after everything." Ranger's gaze was hazy, his breaths shallow, but at Jack's touch his tail thumped weakly against the floor. "I got you, buddy," Jack whispered, tears streaming. "Just like you got me. I won't let go. You hear me? I won't let you go." Clara McGraw and Evelyn McGraw rushed onto the stage. Doña Esther barked orders for equipment, anything to keep Ranger alive. The ceremony faded into silence. Every soul in the room understood they were watching something sacred. "Stay with me," Jack begged, his voice echoing through the auditorium. "You saved me, Ranger. You pulled me out of the dirt. Now let me save you. Please stay." And for a heartbeat, Ranger's breathing steadied, as if Jack's words were stronger than any medicine. 9 years of loyalty, 9 years of love and sacrifice were holding them both on the edge of life. Emergency gear arrived, rushed in from the van outside. Doña Esther slid an IV into Ranger's leg, pushed fluids, monitored vitals. But even as she worked, her eyes said what her lips could barely form. Ranger was dying. He had been since the moment he rose from that wheelchair. That salute to Eli Carter, that final climb, he'd given it everything. "He's not going to make it," Doña Esther murmured to Clara. "His body can't handle more." Clara looked at her father, still cradling Ranger, still whispering hope neither of them believed. "Then let them have this," she said softly. "Let them say goodbye." Jack held Ranger close as the shepherd's breaths grew ragged, his body slowly letting go. But his eyes never left Jack's face. And in them was peace. The mission was complete. Jack was alive, safe, freed. The debt of love paid in full. "Good boy," Jack whispered, pressing his forehead to Ranger's. "The best boy. Thank you for staying. Thank you for never quitting on me. Thank you for loving me when I couldn't love myself." Ranger's tail stirred one last time, a faint flick that carried everything loyalty, devotion, farewell. Then his body softened, his chest stilled. Ranger was gone. Jack wept, not the lost tears of confusion, but the raw, soul-deep sobs of a man who knew exactly what he'd lost. For that moment, the fog of Alzheimer's lifted, and Jack McGraw was whole again, whole enough to grieve, whole enough to say goodbye. "Rest easy, partner," he whispered into Ranger's fur. "Your watch is over. You can rest now." For everyone who witnessed it, this wasn't just a dog's death. It was a sermon on loyalty, a lesson in love. Ranger hadn't only dug a man out of the earth, he had dug Jack out of guilt, out of despair. How many of us sitting there carry our own hidden graves, regrets lost, loves, second chances we think we don't deserve, Ranger's sacrifice, shouted the truth. It's never too late to be pulled back into the light. Never too late to choose love over logic. 6 months drifted by like a long exhale. Jack McGraw now sat on the porch of Clara's San Diego home, watching the Pacific sunset melt the horizon into amber and rose. The view was gentler than his wild cabin in Sequoia, less fierce, more forgiving. He had moved in 3 months earlier, once it became clear he could no longer live alone, once the Alzheimer's had turned forgetting into a daily certainty. Most days he couldn't recall Clara's name, but when he saw her face, he knew one thing for sure: he was safe. He rarely remembered Evelyn McGraw, though she still came by every weekend, her arms full of groceries sitting with him, while Clara McGraw worked long hours at the clinic. The past to Jack was like a shuffled deck scattered across the floor, no order, no meaning. But one memory always cut through the haze like sunlight through storm clouds. Ranger. Jack remembered him with a sharpness that defied every diagnosis. He could feel the weight of the shepherd pressed against his leg, picture the torn ear, recall the steady light in those brown eyes. Most of all, he remembered that last salute, Ranger's paw resting against Eli Carter's photograph. That moment had etched itself into his soul, permanent as a scar, precious as gold. Doc Whitmore had tried explaining it once during a follow-up appointment. Emotional memory lives in different pathways than episodic memory. Ranger's bond with you was primal, hardwired. It's the last anchor you've got left to who you are. But Jack knew it was more than neurons and medical talk. Ranger wasn't just a memory. Ranger was truth, the kind of truth that lives beyond disease, beyond death, beyond the fog. Ranger had loved him, and that love had burned so deeply it couldn't be erased. On the porch beside him sat his old badge. Eli Carter's name still engraved on the back, though Jack no longer checked it compulsively. The guilt was gone, not because he'd found closure, but because Alzheimer's had stolen even that. The irony wasn't lost on Clara. The disease that was breaking her father had also freed him from the prison of blame he'd carried for 6 years. Sometimes mercy wore the mask of tragedy. "Dad." Clara's voice floated gently from the doorway. She'd learned to move slow, to announce herself. Sudden movements startled him. "There's someone here to see you." Jack frowned. Visitors were rare. Usually Evelyn, sometimes one of Clara's friends. But the woman who stepped onto the porch was unfamiliar, middle-aged professional, carrying a folder under her arm. "Mr. McGraw, I'm Dr. Rebecca Hayes from VCA Advanced Veterinary Medical Center in Fresno." She sat across from him, her tone careful, practiced. I was part of the team that cared for Ranger. The name struck Jack like lightning. Clarity returned all at once. Ranger! You knew Ranger? Yes, sir. I assisted Doña Esther Whitlock with his treatment after the rescue. She opened the folder, sliding out photographs. I thought you should see these. Jack's hands trembled as he reached for them. Ranger in ICU, bandaged, hooked to monitor's paws, wrapped in gauze. Another photo, Ranger sleeping face, softened despite the trauma. Then one with his eyes open, staring past the camera, as if searching for Jack, even across distance. He was extraordinary, Dr. Hayes whispered. Do you see this? She pointed to a photo of Ranger's foreleg. That wound was self-inflicted. He bid himself to stay awake, to keep digging, to keep looking for you. Pain kept him conscious when exhaustion should have taken him. Jack's vision blurred with tears. His voice broke. He hurt himself for me. Yes. And his pause. She laid another photograph down, detailed and brutal, the pads torn away, bones visible beneath ragged skin. He dug for 4 hours like this. We couldn't understand how he didn't stop. Why he couldn't stop. In the doorway, Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling silently. She'd read the reports, seen the damage firsthand. But hearing it described this way, watching her father absorb the truth, ripped something open in her chest. Jack never lifted his eyes from the photographs. Why are you showing me this? His voice was raw, fragile. Because I wanted you to see the depth of what he gave for you, Doctor, Hayes said softly. Then she pulled out one last envelope. But also because Ranger's story didn't end the day he died. Jack blinked, confused. Before Ranger passed, we preserved genetic material. With Clara's permission, we paired him with a female from the same bloodline, the same lineage that traces back to Shadow, the dog who saved your father in 1985. Jack's hands froze on the photographs. His breath caught. Shadow Dr. Hayes nodded. Yes, Ranger was Shadow's descendant. And now, there's a puppy. 8 weeks old. The last of the bloodline. Dr. Hayes smiled softly. We thought you should have the first chance to meet him, to decide if you want to carry on Ranger's legacy. Clara McGraw stepped closer, her voice thick with emotion. Dad, I've already seen the puppy. He's beautiful black and tan, one floppy ear, and eyes that look just like Ranger's. A puppy. Jack McGraw repeated his mind, straining through the fog to grasp it. His name is Eli, Clara whispered. We named him for Eli Carter, because Ranger's last act was honoring him, helping release you from guilt you should never have carried. It felt right for Ranger's legacy to carry that name. Jack closed his eyes, the name cutting through his confusion like a blade. Eli Carter, the young officer he had thought he failed the ghost he had carried for years. The details were lost now, scattered and broken, but the name stayed heavy with meaning. And then Ranger, the dog who saved him, who gave everything. Now a new pup, carrying both bloodline and memory, waiting to begin again. Jack opened his eyes, wet with tears. I want to meet him. I want to meet Eli. Dr. Hayes' smile widened. He's in my car. I hoped you'd say that. Moments later, she returned, holding a wriggling bundle of fur, black and tan, oversized paws, ears too big for his head. She set him down on the porch, and the pup immediately bounced forward, sniffing and wagging his tail so hard his whole body shook. Then, as if guided by instinct, he locked onto Jack and bounded straight into his lap. Jack laughed, a sound Clara hadn't heard from him in months. The puppy licked his face, his hands climbing all over him in a storm of pure joy. Jack wrapped his arms around the tiny body, holding him close. Hello, Eli, he whispered. Hello, little man. The puppy quieted, resting in his lap. Gazing up, with eyes startlingly like Ranger's wise, loyal knowing. "Ranger's in him," Jack said with certainty. "I can feel it, his loyalty, his love. It's all there." Clara knelt beside him. "He's yours, Dad. If you want him, we'll raise him together. Maybe he'll be your anchor like Ranger was." Jack turned to her, and for one fleeting moment, clarity broke through. He saw her as the little girl clutching the chipped mug, as the teenager defending him against whispers about his PTSD, as the woman who became a vet because she grew up watching him love Ranger. The moment slipped quickly, her name already fading, but the love held steady. "I want him," Jack said firmly. "I want to honor Ranger. I want to keep what he started." Dr. Hayes pulled paperwork from her folder. "Then he's yours. His pedigree, his health records, everything you need. And one more thing." She laid down a photograph of a strong female shepherd. "This is Eli's mother. She's from Shadow's line, but also descended from one of the canines your father worked with before Shadow. Loyalty runs through this line for generations. It's in their very DNA." Jack stared at the photograph, then down at the pup nestled against him. His voice was thick. "My father, Hank McGraw. He had Shadow." Dr. Hayes nodded. "Yes. Shadow saved your father's life in 19. Ranger saved yours in 2024. And now Eli. Now he has the chance to carry it forward. Or maybe just to be loved. Either way, the line lives on." After Dr. Hayes left, Clara sat beside her father as the sun dipped low. The pup had finally worn himself out and was curled asleep in Jack's lap, his tiny paws twitching as he dreamed. Jack's hand rested gently on the puppy's back, feeling its steady breath, its heartbeat. "Clara," Jack said suddenly, his voice clear. The sound of her name startled her tears loose. "Yes, Dad. I need you to know something," Jack whispered. "Most days I don't remember you. I don't remember your childhood, raising you, being your father." His voice broke. "But I need you to know, even when the memories are gone, some part of me still loves you. The same part that remembers Ranger. The part deeper than memory." Clara squeezed his hand tight, her own tears falling freely. "I know, Dad. I know. I know," Jack McGraw said softly. "Ranger taught me that. That love doesn't need memory to survive. That loyalty lives deeper than the mind." He looked down at the sleeping puppy in his lap. "And Eli, he'll teach me the same thing. Every day I'll forget him. And every day I'll fall in love with him all over again. That's not a curse. It's a blessing in its own way." An hour later, Evelyn McGraw arrived for her weekend visit. She stepped onto the porch and stopped short, her eyes filling, when she saw the puppy curled against Jack's chest, Clara McGraw leaning quietly against her father's chair. Evelyn didn't need an explanation. The tears came before she could stop them. "That's Ranger's pup," she whispered, lowering herself into the chair on Jack's other side. "His name's Eli," Jack said proudly, as though introducing royalty. "Eli Carter Ranger's legacy." Evelyn reached out with trembling fingers to stroke the puppy's fur. Her voice broke. "I left you," she confessed, the words spilling out. 4 years ago I walked away because I couldn't handle your guilt, your grief, your demons. I abandoned you when you needed me most." Jack turned his eyes toward her. For a fleeting moment, clarity cut through the fog. "I don't remember that. I don't remember you leaving. Truth is, I don't remember much at all." He paused, his voice steady. "But Ranger never left. And he's still teaching me even now that it's never too late. Never too late to come back. Never too late to choose love, even when it's hard." "Can I stay?" Evelyn asked the question, holding more weight than just the evening. Can I stay here with you, with Clara, with Eli? Can I have another chance? Jack's clarity was fading, his gaze already beginning to cloud again, but he nodded. Ranger would want that. He believed in second chances, in pulling people out of dark places. He believed in never giving up. He glanced at the puppy, then added with a soft smile, he believed in starting over. So they sat there, three people broken in different ways, watching the sky burn purple and gold as the sun sank low. A family fractured but slowly mending. An old man fading piece by piece. A loyal dog's bloodline sleeping in his arms. And the promise that tomorrow, even if Jack forgot everything else, he'd still remember the truths that mattered most, that he'd been loved by a creature who refused to let him die, and that loyalty runs deeper than memory, that redemption never comes too late, and that sometimes the greatest gift in life is simply the chance to begin again. Inside on the kitchen table, a new collar waited. Clara had ordered it weeks ago, daring to hope for this very moment. On the tag were etched the words Eli, Ranger's legacy. Loyalty never dies. Tomorrow, they would buckle that collar around the pup's neck. Tomorrow, training would begin, and with it, new love, new memories, new hope, even as old ones slipped away. Jack might forget tomorrow, might not remember holding Eli or whispering Ranger's name into the night. But the pup would remember. He would grow up knowing this man protecting him, loving him just as Shadow Ranger and all those before him had protected the McGraw men for 40 years. The line of loyalty would go on unbroken. Proof that love, real love, outlives memory, outlasts time, even outshines death itself. As night fell, Clara helped her father inside. Jack still cradled the puppy, his touch gentle. He looked down once more. Ranger, he murmured, then caught himself smiling softly. No, Eli. Good boy, Eli. The pup's tail wagged in his sleep. In that small, unconscious movement lived everything: the promise of tomorrow, the echo of yesterday, and the eternal truth of love that asks for nothing but gives everything. And somewhere, wherever good dogs go when their watch is over, Ranger rested easy, knowing the man he saved had found reason to live again, knowing his bloodline would carry on, knowing that loyalty, true loyalty, never dies. His shift had ended. But the watch itself, passed from paw to paw, heart to heart, would never end.